Hey guys, please support my new channel. It's called Mr. No Sleep, and I'll be regularly uploading no sleep stories from Reddit. It's the first link in the description. Thank you. Hi, my name is Sarah. I'm 27, and I have a story to share with you. This is one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. It's a bit of a long story, so stick with me. I grew up and went to school in a small town in Ohio. It was your typical quiet, rural, white neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. Not much to do. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that life was boring. At 18 years of age, I had enough. I needed more excitement in my life. I wanted to move out, to start a new life, meet new people, and get a better paying job. So, one day, I sold my car and a few other belongings I had and moved to Portland, Oregon. I loved the city. The noise, the cars, the lights. I loved it all. A place so different to my town and just everything I was looking for. Shortly after moving, I got myself a job fairly close to my apartment at a local store and started doing the night shifts. The pay was good and it was really close to my place, so I was lucky in that sense. Surprisingly though, the night shifts weren't as busy as I thought. 10 customers would be the maximum per night, and for a neighborhood as populated as this one, it was surprising. I never had any bad experiences with customers and all was well. It's important to mention at this point that I had no friends yet. I got to know a couple of my co-workers and my boss, but only spent time with them during work hours, and sometimes wouldn't even see them at work. So, one early morning, at around 5 a.m., I was walking back to my apartment as my shift had ended. It was still dark as it was winter here in Portland. As I walked along the sidewalk, I noticed a red car with black tinted windows, but the passenger window lowered. I saw a glimpse of a man, middle-aged, bearded, handsome dude, staring at me. I'm really shy and, like many introverts, staring back at him would never be an option. The last thing I wanted to do was start up a conversation with a random man in a dark street at 5 a.m. in the morning. As I walked further from the car, I could feel his eyes on my back. I knew he was staring at me. I walked as calmly as possible and got to my place shortly after, exhausted, and never even gave a second thought to the man in the red car. I went to sleep. I was living alone in a fairly spacious 3-bedroom apartment with the ground floor all to myself. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, but they were currently empty, and so I was alone. The neighborhood was not so great. My apartment was on the ground level, and my bedroom window faced the main street. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people would often rummage. Before I get to the scary part, let me tell you about my fear of big cities. As a small town girl, my biggest fear in a big city was getting kidnapped, and then raped or sold to sex trafficking gangs. My mum would always bang on and on about the dangers of big cities, and this really stuck with me. From the day I arrived, I was always paranoid. If a random man stares at me for a little too long, I'd have a mini panic attack. So, about 1 after I went to bed, past 6 a.m. now, but still dark outside, I heard a tapping at my window. My back was to the window and my eyes were now wide open. As I already said, it was still dark outside. I sleep with my lamp on. and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a slat, causing a huge 6-inch gap. So I knew that whoever or whatever the source of the tapping was could see me laying in bed as plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps, so I spent the next 5 seconds or so frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself that it was something, anything else but a person, watching me and tapping on my window. Maybe an animal. Remember, my back was to the guy, so I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and pretending I was too groggy to hear him. I stood up and hazily made my way out of my bedroom as though I were going to the restroom or something. Once I was out of his sight, I ran straight to the phone to dial 911, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt, underwear and socks and bolt out of my front door, which was out of sight from the intruder. I just wasn't sure I could outrun whoever it was or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't, considering nobody really speaks to each other in this big city, unlike my small town where everyone talks to everyone. Before I could make a decision, I heard the loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump out from my chest. At the same time, I could hear the operator trying to get my attention on the phone. I quickly told the police my address to get here quickly, as there was an intruder trying to get in my house. I told them to hurry up and that I'd be in the bathroom. At this point I was scared, and my heart was racing so fast I thought I'd pass out. There is a police station close to my apartment, so I knew it wouldn't be long before they arrived. I stormed into the bathroom and locked myself in. About a minute later, the man was at my bathroom, banging on my bathroom door. I was leaning against the door, holding on for dear life, hoping that it wouldn't break. Two minutes later, I heard the police sirens, and almost immediately, the police entered my apartment. I heard the loud footsteps and all the commotion, but I didn't come out. I heard them screaming and yelling at the man to put his hands up and get on the floor. I still didn't make any noise. I stood there, leaning against the bathroom door, praying that everything was okay. The commotion quietened down and a policewoman knocked on the bathroom door after about 10 minutes, quietly telling me that it was safe to come out. I opened my door a few inches and peeked out, still terrified. The policewoman took a lot of information from me. I told her everything I could remember, including the man in the red car from earlier. She told me that they arrested the intruder and that he was outside, and asked me if I would know him by any chance. To my absolute shock and surprise, it was the same man from earlier in the night in the street, in the same red car. They arrested him and took him in for questioning, and he went to jail for attempted robbery, home invasion, and stalking. Turns out, he first saw me on the 14th of January, which is the first day that I arrived in Portland. Today it's the 27th of January. He confessed that every single day that I was in Portland, he would follow me around. He knew my work hours, my address, my workplace, and even followed me to the nearby gym that I signed up at 4 days ago. He never shared his plans or what he intended on doing with me. The police did not find any weapons on him, which is so weird. The police later told me, however, that he has a history of mental disorders and schizophrenia. He's always had problems of not taking his medication, and has been arrested multiple times for having manic episodes. So, I guess he wanted to kidnap me? I don't know, but the fact that he had no weapons on him whatsoever is so weird to me. So, that's my story. I moved out to a different, safer neighborhood and I'm now on the 27th floor. I'll likely be keeping my job because it pays so well, and as an introvert, I like the quietness of the night shift. Sometimes though, I wonder if I made a big mistake by moving to a big city as the introvert, shy person that I am. Maybe the small town suits me better. Well, either way, this incident doesn't help me at all. Back in about 2000 or 2001, I was driving by myself from visiting my mum in Colorado back to Arizona. I've always been scared driving at night that there is someone in my backseat that is going to get me. And this might be because of too many scary movies, or because my mum's paranoia rubbed off on me. I was in the army and drove back and forth a lot to visit her. She would get mad at me for sleeping at rest stops or gas stations and tell me that someone was going to kidnap me and kill me one day. But I just didn't want to be bothered with the hassle and expense of a motel most of the time. I digress. So, I'm driving on an empty stretch of highway late at night with no other cars around. I had just entered New Mexico, as I had to drive through this state before entering Arizona. To describe this place, I was on a desolate stretch of highway with hundreds of miles of the New Mexico desert in front of me and hundreds of miles of the Colorado desert behind me. The closest rest stop and gas station is probably around 50 miles on this stretch of road. It was nearly 1 a.m. in the morning, and the quietness of the desert was both eerie and peaceful. I remember thinking that a breakdown here would be the end of me. I drove on, with the quiet whispers of my radio and the desert cacti being all I could hear and see. Suddenly, this red truck comes up behind me, flashing his lights and honking his horn at me frantically and driving way too close behind me. I was thinking to myself that there was something wrong with my car, or maybe they needed help, because why else would he be so insistent on pulling me over? Bear in mind, there was no way that this guy was highway patrol or a police car. So, I pull over. I was in my early 20s and still a bit naive, and I get out of my car. As I'm getting out of my car, the red truck has stopped directly behind me and still flashing his lights and honking his horn. Curious, I walked to about the middle of my car. I planned on going to the back of my car to see what could have been wrong with my car, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. Why is he still honking at me when I'm out of my car and still flashing his lights? That's odd. Then, he slowly gets out of his truck. That's when I knew that something wasn't right. I jumped back in my car and sped off as fast as I could. There was this sudden wave of fear that overwhelmed me, and without even thinking, I was back on the highway and speeding away from this man. The next exit was 45 miles or so away. He followed me the entire time. Finally, I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance. I had to pull over. I had plenty of fuel, but I didn't want to risk breaking down somewhere and being alone with this guy. I sat near the gas station and waited. I didn't get out of the car because I was too terrified he'd get to me before I entered the gas station. Still, no cars anywhere near this place, and there is probably one person working the night shift inside the gas station. I figured the safest place was to remain in the car, and if he got out of his car and approached me, I would speed off and call the police. The man stayed in his truck the entire time, but because of the tinted windows, I couldn't see him. I felt as though he was watching me the whole time. I could feel it, and I was terrified. I did not want to get out of my car. I waited for about an hour when he finally left. After he left, I waited a little longer before continuing my drive back to Arizona. I was paranoid and watchful for any red trucks the entire time. Fast forward to about 2 or 3 years after this night. I'm watching Unsolved Mysteries or some similar type crime show with my husband at the time. He knew about the red truck as we were dating at the time of that incident. And what story pops up? One about a man on that exact stretch of highway with a red truck that used those exact tactics to get a few women to pull over and murdered them. Although I don't remember his facial features from that night, since it was kind of dark, one feature that stood out to me was his bald head. I'm really glad that my gut told me something was wrong that night, and to get back in my car and drive. Stay safe out there, people. I grew up in a large Midwest community, raised by a single mum. We lived in a small 2-bedroom house in the middle of a neighborhood that was situated on top of a large hill with plenty of busy roads nearby. The neighborhood was tiny, the houses were far apart, and the nearest home was around half a mile away. At the time of this story, I was 4 or 5 years old, and like any kid my age, I was having issues sleeping in my own bed. On a night like any other, my mum tucked me into my bed, turned on my nightlight, and shut my door. Her bedroom was located directly across the hallway, so if I needed anything, I could call her name and she would be there instantly. I woke up suddenly one night, not because I was scared or alarmed, but simply because I didn't feel the need to sleep. My bed was pushed up against the wall, and my window was located at the foot of the bed. I remember looking at the ceiling and out of the window, and noticing how bright the moon was shining into my room. As I turned towards the wall to try to go back to sleep, I noticed that someone was looking in my window. I don't think I was old enough to be freaked out by this because I don't remember feeling scared. There was this lady. She looked completely normal. She looked at me and then waved at me. Then she told me to open the window further, although it was already open a crack and I could clearly hear her voice. I got out from under my covers and opened the window a little more. There was an old nail sticking out of the wall that prevented the window from opening more than a quarter of the way. She smiled for a few seconds and then calmly asked, "Can you help me find a house I'm looking for?" My mum had explained to me 100 times that I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers, and apparently this time I forgot all of her teachings because I was more than happy to help this lady. The lady told me some random address that she was looking for. I could barely remember my own address, let alone comprehend where the address was that she was looking for. I told her I didn't know where that house was and then she smiled at me. Honestly, this made me feel good because I was a little disappointed that I couldn't help my new friend at the time, and her smile reassured me. Thinking back, this was terrifying. After a few seconds of silence, she said, "Do you think you could come with me and help me find this place?" I can remember slowly getting out of my bed while keeping eye contact with this woman. Again, she wasn't particularly scary, and I wasn't scared either, but she just seemed a little desperate from what I could remember. Of course, at this age I didn't know what was going on or why she was acting weird. But anyhow, I backed up to my door and put my hand on the doorknob. The closer I got to my door, the closer she got to my window, until her face was touching the glass. I opened my door and calmly walked into my mum's room, still not understanding the severity of the situation. My mum immediately woke up and asked me what was wrong. As soon as I told her that there was a lady outside my window, she started freaking out. She asked me about 1,000,000 times if I was sure that it wasn't a dream. When she went into my room, sure enough, the window was open, but no lady to be found. Needless to say, my mum made me sleep with her for months after this happened. I think the scariest part about this is that I truly didn't understand how bad of a situation I was in, and the fact that she looked completely normal. This lady could have easily taken me out of my window. Around the time that this happened, a girl that lived in my neighborhood went missing. My mum never reported what happened to the police, but I always wonder if it could have been related. They still haven't found Trudy Appleby. I hope she's okay somewhere. Let me start by saying that I really enjoy driving, and I will often be on the road for hours just listening to music and getting lost. So more often than not, I will sleep in my car on the side of a country road. I don't like it when I'm the passenger though, so I always go alone. Usually, I sleep for a bit, wake up, then go home without incident. There's been a couple of times when a deer has startled me, or even a person knocking on my window to make sure that I was okay was met with a scream. But what happened last night takes the absolute cake. I read about a really nice walk online that I wanted to visit. It was about a 5-hour drive, and I had planned to drive for an hour at a time, explore for a bit, then keep going so I didn't get bored. I had taken plenty of food and water and was planning to be gone for about a day, which I was, and was going to park in a popular parking spot that caravanners and the like tend to stay overnight. It was lovely and I had a really good time. I arrived at my sleeping destination and found that there wasn't any space to park. The bays were not laid out, so you just kind of had to use your common sense and find a spot where you weren't blocking anyone. The parking area was free and could only contain about 10 cars or vans without it being too tight. I was a little annoyed, but hey ho. It was a very rural area, so I carried on for a little while and pulled into a lay-by to rest before I drove home. I pulled in and parked. Then I went to sleep, thinking nothing of it. To describe where I had parked, it was opposite a little cottage, but not directly in front of it, and there were plenty of trees, so I didn't feel as though I was intruding on the owners in any way. I felt very safe. For some reason I was having trouble nodding off. Usually, I slept like a baby in my car because it's very spacious and comfortable, and as silly as it may sound to some, I genuinely thought that I had nothing to worry about. That was until a long, high-pitched scratching sound woke me up at around 11:30 p.m, just after I had drifted off. I was in a confused daze when I saw a very tall, middle-aged man dragging what I thought was a key around the perimeter of my car. He walked very slowly and didn't take his eyes off of me the entire time. He also had a very malicious grin on his face. Horrified, I cranked my chair up and started the car, ready to floor it. But he had made his way to the front of my bonnet, and trees were blocking me from reversing. This is when I saw that he was holding a butcher's knife. He held it up and sort of waved it at me. I screamed and laid on the horn, but it didn't seem to faze him. This lasted about 10 to 15 seconds. Not long, but felt like ages. And then he just slowly walked away from my car towards the cottage and proceeded to enter the cottage. I drove home without stopping. I'm never doing that again. Thanks for ruining it for me, genuinely terrifying man. And thanks for ruining my paintwork. I don't know if he was just trying to teach me a lesson for parking outside his house or what. But either way, I'll probably be scarred for life. So, let me preface this story by saying that I live in the middle of nowhere. My roommates and I ended up reluctantly moving here because it was the only place we could find equidistance from both of our jobs. So, anyway, it's about 2 AM on a Saturday, and I'm up late watching TV as, of course, I don't work the next day. My 5-month-old Dutch Shepherd, Maddie, is out of her dog bed and is giving me hints that she wants to go outside. I decide to walk her once more before going to sleep. Now, walking out of my front door, I have a decently sized driveway. Outside of that, it's basically wilderness, but there is a huge field where I usually walk her right in front of the house. There ain't too many trees or shrubs, so you can normally see a far distance away, especially this night since it was a full bright moon. Per usual, I head straight for that field. I walk her for about 10 minutes and allow her to do her business. It's the dead of night and there is no one outside, no noises, dead silence, apart from the usual small animal and insect sounds in the surrounding area. I begin walking back towards the house to go inside. When I was about 30 feet away from my front door, I look to my right to check on one of my cars. I don't drive it often as it's my backup car, so occasionally I check it to make sure that it looks alright. I noticed that the driver's rear window is half lowered. That's weird, I think to myself. I haven't driven it in 2 months and I don't recall leaving that down. Surely I would have noticed it sooner, I continue to think. I stare at the car, checking for visible damage, doors open, etc., while also trying to remember the last time I drove it. It was at this point that Maddie started barking uncontrollably. To give you some perspective on the dynamic of the situation, imagine a clock. My body is facing 12, which is the direction of my front door. My head's facing 4. The field is at 6 PM directly opposite my front door. And Maddie's barking and pulling towards 11, almost in the opposite direction that I'm facing, and just to the left of my front door. I don't look at her as she starts barking, and I can feel that she's tugging towards the direction of my front door, and she likely wants to go inside, as it's kind of chilly. After staring at my car for literally 5 seconds, and not noticing any obvious damage, I decide to take her inside, put her to bed, and come back to investigate. I turn my head back to 12 to head towards the house. That's when I see him. There is a man standing about 3 feet away from me, which isn't very far for a stranger to stand next to you. Maddie is buckled down and growling. I look the man in the face and notice that he's not looking at me. He's staring at my dog with crazed eyes. I hold her leash in such a way that she's just short of being able to attack him. Next, I notice his hand. His left hand is resting casually to the side, but his right hand is hidden, almost as though he's holding something behind his back, possibly in his back pocket. He's got a knife, or worse, a gun, I think. After about 10 seconds of standing there silently with him staring at my dog, I say, "What's up?" Not in a "hey buddy" kind of way, but in the literally "what do you want" kind of tone. No response. He doesn't break concentration on my puppy still. I see him shifting his right hand around behind his back. My heart starts beating harder. I realize it's do or die time, and I begin contemplating how I'd react if he attacked me. After a brief moment, his right hand comes to his side in a relaxed, casual way, as his left hand is. He's between me and my door, but I know I have to get away from him. I stood there, terrified to move, frozen with fear. Shortly after that, the man begins walking towards me. He passes me and towards the large field we'd just come from and disappears into the distance. All the while, I was still frozen with fear. But that was it. That was the last I saw of him. Shortly after he leaves, I stood in front of my front door, and the entire situation begins to dawn on me. I never heard or saw him, even though I was looking in his direction for the 2 minutes that it took me to walk from the field towards my house. I only looked away to look at my car. I didn't hear him approach at all in the dead of night. He must have snuck up on me purposely. He never spoke to me, he never responded to my question, and he never met eyes with me. The whole time, he just stared at my dog. I realized what he was doing. He was sizing her up to see if he could take her or me before the other one interferes. After 20 seconds or so of thought, I guess he decided not to. I did not know this man. He did not inquire about my dog. He didn't ask me anything. This, to me, means he had ill intentions. I'm 22 years old, and for the 22 years that led up to 4 months ago when I got Maddie, I was a cat girl. It has taken only 4 months for this puppy to change my mind on that. I now know why they're called man's best friend.